really, it was the idea was this mechanic that made you very, very, very uncomfortable. Did anybody go on Alien Encounter in Florida? So the idea that because there was a lot of thought into it. So obviously the main technology was binaural sound. So we needed to keep you in a certain place where your head was in a certain place, so you could get the main effect from the speakers. And we went around and around and around on like what kind of restraint to put on people. And we're talking about seat belts, and we're talking about different things. We finally came up with this roller coaster restraint because the idea would be you cannot get out of it. And I mean, like when the lights go out and you're literally sitting just for that moment. It's like when you're on an airplane and something happens and you go from being just a single person to now we're all in this together. It was kind of like that moment. It's like the lights are off and we can't get out of these chairs. So like there was definitely a mechanical aspect of that show that was designed to make you really, really, really uncomfortable. And if you know the history of that attraction, it was first designed to be inspired by Alien, which was a pretty scary movie. I don't think I've ever seen the whole movie, and most of it I watched with my ears plugged up. But I mean, I think we have to say that was a scary movie. And the idea was, it was a pretty grim story at the beginning.
Do you remember that first Alien that Andy Gaskell, who was the art director on Lion King? He had worked on Watcher in the Woods when it had an unbelievable ending. I think it might be a bonus feature on that.
Right.
But it was the most amazing creature that nobody ever saw. And I said, Andy, could you recreate that? And we did it. And then everyone looked at it and said, nobody can see that.
No way.
Yeah. Not trapped in a chair. Yeah,
and really, as you guys know, your imagination is much worse than if we really showed you something. So the idea is you're only getting glimpses, it's that strobe light of like, what is that? And then you're hearing things, but mostly you're feeling things behind you and drooling on you and breathing on you, and the subwoofers were repurposed, and like, so you're feeling these heavy, heavy footsteps.
And then the water on the back.
The water on the back here. So it was really, but the whole thing was made that much worse because you were trapped. And that was the basic idea behind it.
So a funny story, back when Theme Park Adventure is 22 years old this summer, and way back when, one of the first big things we covered was the creation of Indiana Jones at Disneyland. And as I was writing about Indy all the time, I was very often calling Susan and Tony at WDI, probably way too much, and asking them questions because I wanted to make sure that we had all the facts right and everything. And I had mentioned to Susan, I didn't know, you probably don't remember this, but this was lesson number 1 for me in this industry. So I had mentioned to Susan that I had just come back from Walt Disney World, and she said, "Oh, did you go on Alien Encounter?" And I said, "Yeah, I did." And she said, "Well, what did you think about it?" And I said, first of all, I don't know what the hell they were thinking putting that in the Magic Kingdom.
Mistake number 1.
Putting it in Tomorrowland, it's like terrifying, and don't move, it's right behind you. And this hot air and cruel, and kids are losing their minds, moms are crying, dads are like, no, I'm going to get a hot dog, And I was just like, I had no idea what the hell were you guys thinking, and so I'm saying this, and there's silence, and then Susan says, "Oh, well, that was my attraction." Lesson number 1. It was wonderful.
It would have worked really well in like MGM Studio Tours.
If it was put in the MGM Studio, I think it would still be a cornerstone attraction today.
Right, I think so too.
Yeah. Now, that was, so the story, so I did both versions of it. So the story is that Michael Eisner came in and saw it and said, no way, this is like way too much. You got to tone it down a little bit, and then it was retooled. Is that a true story, or is that an urban legend?
Well, no, there was the original story that was super grim, and then of course to compensate, Imagineering tried to add humor to it, but it was the ultimate, cornerstone story if something has gone terribly wrong. Yeah. And then it was retooled, and I think there were a couple of bumbling scientists, and it was testing a technology and a feature. But what was interesting is if you looked at science fiction and what was happening in science fiction, they were starting on this arc where technology really was the villain, you know. So I think in some ways, if we hadn't, even if we hadn't had it be as scary as it ultimately was, but if we hadn't tried to add humor, but really played on the fact that, you know, technology, and especially some of the places that we're going today, is like, are we really thinking this through? You know, AI. I remember Terminator when it came out in 1984. My brother came home and told me the entire story at the dinner table, and we were just kind of like, and then, you know, she's sitting in the Jeep and she's taking the picture, and who's she thinking about? And, oh, it's him. And, you know, we were just like, what in the world is this movie with this story? We were just for 2 hours he had told us, and we went to see the movie. We're just like, wow. And little known story, I come from Marietta, Georgia. Robert Patrick and Robert Patrick's mother and my mother grew up together. So then he was in the second Terminator, and with the T-1000. So like, we were very, very interested in that movie. But the idea that technology could go wrong in and of itself was a very strong science fiction theme, and I wish Imagineering had really played along with that, rather than add humor.
I just was going to add a thing there in terms of contexting. I think one of the things you talk about if it had been in the studio tour, one of the things we can do, and oftentimes we don't, is really give the guests a good sense of what they're getting into before they get into it.
Right.
If you take a little ride like Snow White, in Florida for 25 years we had a sign that says, "Note, the witch appears 3 times in this attraction and may scare the children." And that was needed because the front was a beautiful panorama of the castle, and I'm wishing and all this
Misdirection.
Yeah, so what we did in California, you go through a dungeon. And we've never had a single complaint on that because little kids are weeded out before they even get to the queue. And I think the alien encounter we had, was it Skippy and the other?
Yeah, it was like this little creature, it's really cute, he gets fried, and you're like thinking, oh, well, that didn't quite go right, but it's funny.
The kid in the park wanted plush animals, they couldn't use the thing in the cage in the end to make plush out of it. So they came up with this pre-show, that really kind of threw people off.
And it was a free show that Tim Curry did the voice of Sir.
Tim Curry was the Well, actually, I think we started. There was a Phil Hartman version, and then he was replaced by Tim Curry. But Tim Curry was great, and Kevin Pollak and Kathy Najimy, they're all in it. And you know, they were legitimately funny. But I think